Um, I'm Dr. Turner, curator of the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American collection, and I am delighted. As you know, it's Black History Month, but we do Black History this year 366 days. And the person, the esteemed scholar who's here today, it's such an honor to introduce her. Dr. Deborah G. Plant. She is an African-American literature and Africana studies independent scholar and literary critic specializing in the life and works of Zora Neale Hurston. She is the author of Greed and Glory in Pursuit of Freedom for All, which she's going to talk about today. She is the editor of Barracoon, the story of the last black cargo, which actually was on the New York Times bestseller list. So I think we should clap for that. She is also editor of The Inside Light, New Critical Essays on Zora Neale Hurston, and the author of Zora Neale Hurston, A Biography of the Spirit, and Every Tub Must Sit on Its Own Bottom, The Philosophy and Politics of Zora Neale Hurston. She holds a BA from Southern University, an MA from Atlanta University, an MA and a PhD degrees in English from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. She was instrumental in the founding of the University of South Florida Department of Africana Studies and chaired the department for 5 years. And she resides in Florida. And I just want to say she's a dear friend. We actually taught together at the University of South Florida. So whenever she writes a new book, I tell her, you got to come to Philly. And she honors my wishes. And I just wanted to now acknowledge one of our students, like Dr. Plant and I both taught Kenya Stevens, who came up from Washington, D.C. today to see, well, really to see Deb, but I'm going to say to see both of us, right, Kenya? So without further ado, I'm going to bring Deb up. And Deb, whoops, I meant to say Dr. Plant.
That's okay. It's okay. We know who we are, right? Thank you, Dr. Turner, for your invitation and always, being my support. She's always been my support from the beginning, and I thank you for that. And I want to thank the Blockson collection staff for making everything possible, organizing this event. I appreciate that. And I thank you all for coming. Everybody's busy. Everybody's got something to do. So to take the time is special, especially when you're coming up from faraway places. And, I live in Florida. I'm not from Florida. Don't hold that against me. That wasn't, yeah. Okay. All right. So one of the things I want us to do in the outset is to, with this next song I want to play, I'll play a couple of minutes of it. I want us to think about someone we know who is incarcerated, whether in this state or in another state or someplace else in the world, whether they're incarcerated in the way that we understand incarceration or incarcerated in some other kind of way. Because one of the things that I talk about in this book is that enslavement takes many forms. So does incarceration. They're the same thing, actually. And I want us to think about those who are incarcerated because it's designed that we forget them. And so, we have to remember our loved ones. We have to remember people from our community, our churches, people we work with who have gotten caught up in this system that it's intended for us to be there. And so a lot of the times, especially when people are incarcerated for long sentences, those who know them and care about them actually sort of forget about them. And that's for a lot of reasons, including economic ones. A lot of times they can't travel to visit with people. So I want us just to think about them for a few minutes.
I've been painted a picture.
Can you hear that all right?
Pictures of deals in back alleys where politicians often hide. But it's much more important to me than I'm gonna lose you. Got a lot to do with justice, but more with Gary Tyler line. I got a letter from his mother that said, please say something to my son. Yeah, the truth is, Angola, Louisiana, that's the one. Well, I ain't never been nowhere near Angola, Louisiana. Down in St. Charles Parish, where the sun won't go alone. But injustice is not confined to Angola, Louisiana. Gotta lock your living room as long as it surrounds your home. I sent my love to Brother Tyler, but after all is said and done, well, truth is, Angola, Louisiana, you're the one. I can't tell a man not to defend himself, but not at this late stage. Can't tell a man he ain't got no rights nowhere, but not in this day and age. And this song may not touch a whole lot of people, persuaded by the truth. But take a look at what's going on, people, cause this all can happen to you, yeah. Truth is just like, well, I've been painted a picture. See, it's of Louisiana. But down in St. Charles Parish, where the sun won't go alone.
Anybody hasn't heard of Angola? It's, sometimes I'm talking to people about this book, and I tell them that my brother is in Angola. And they say, in Africa? And it's what that says to me is that this huge thing that's going on in this country, so many people don't know anything about it. And so that has to change. If you don't know, if you haven't heard about Angola, then we have a lot of work to do, because that's not something. It's just not acceptable. We live in a country that calls itself, or we call it, the land of the free. And in this land of the free, more than 2 million people are jailed or in prison. The United States, which likes to point a finger at other countries, has one of the highest has the highest incarceration rate in the world. We've heard political so-called leaders talk about Russia and China and their dictatorial and totalitarian and tyrannical. But the United States has more people in jail than they do. Louisiana State Penitentiary, which many people refer to as Angola's largest maximum security prison in the country. Over 200,000 people are doing life sentences in this country. Almost 5,000 are doing life without the possibility of parole. That basically means that you're supposed to die there. It's a death sentence. They don't call it a death sentence, but it's a death sentence. And at Angola, those who are they're called lifers, those who are lifers. And lifers include those who are on death, who not only on death row, but those who have this sentence that you have no possibility of parole. Then there are those who are sentenced to life and there is a possibility of parole. And then there are those who are sentenced to 50 or more years, which can also become a life sentence. Then there are those who are sentenced for consecutive years of 25 or more. All of this adds up to 53,000, circa 53,000 people. And then those who are in Angola, those who have been issued this kind of sentence without the possibility of parole, nearly 5,000, and 75% are African American. And this is where my brother is. In Angola, sentenced to life at hard labor without the possibility of parole. And basically, that means they don't intend to give me my brother back. I have other ideas about that. This system is such an integral part of the economy of the country. And you sort of wouldn't know it because we don't talk about it. And a lot of the times, those of us who are directly involved with people who are caught in that system, we don't get it either. And for all kinds of reasons, and I think one of the main reasons is that locking us up has become normalized. It's just what happens. You know, and the outrage that you feel once you really get an understanding of what's happening, you wonder, like, how did I miss this? Right? Only when I started writing what turned out to be this book. It's not what I started writing, but it's what happened. And I was amazed myself at the fact that I'm part of what sustains the system. This, you can't see the smaller print, but it's like $80 billion is spent on this system. It costs a lot to keep people locked up. But the thing about it is that what's not talked about is the fact that that $80 billion gets spread around to a lot of people, like the prosecuting attorney, right? Like the judges who make the decisions to impose these life sentences on people, like bail bonds enterprises, where you have to, if you are lucky enough to be able to post bond, you've got to pay fees that are, you don't get those back. Everybody's got their hands in this prison pie. And in a lot of places, like in Angola, Louisiana, that's the major economy. That's the employment agency. And so, it supports so many that it's like, how do you change that? How do you change a system that the very people who are making their living from it are the ones who would need to have something to do with changing it? And that's not really, we don't see that happening, so we have to look at other alternatives. But when I look at my contribution to it, see, when you care about somebody, you're going to go see them. You want them to have some kind of comfort, so you're sending them something. And so it's whether you're buying gas so to take that drive, or you are leaving money at the commissary, or through, some people use, I think they call it PayPal, JPay, right? It's sometimes if you want to communicate through sending an email, that costs. Everything costs. If you're going to have a conversation on the phone, that costs. And all of those enterprises, all of those corporations are making their money too. Okay? And so what families are giving of their own income to this system, almost $3 billion a year. This is extraction of our wealth from our communities. But we don't think about it that way because we don't think about it. But we have to start thinking about it. One of the things I've been trying to do, or tried to do in Of Greed and Glory, is to look at, and this was my initial objective, to look at historical enslavement and how historical enslavement gets reproduced in contemporary society. My understanding has come to be that enslavement is not about an institution. We call it the peculiar institution of slavery, but it's not about an institution. Enslavement or slavery is a mindset and a worldview. It's about a hierarchy. It's about domination and subjugation. And that's not contained in an institution, because if it were, you could destroy the institution and it's gone. But it's the essence of it continues. And in the 20th century, it takes so many forms, and certainly mass incarceration is one of the forms that it takes. And so three of the many features of comparison, points of comparison between mass incarceration and historical enslavement, the fact that when we look at both of them, we see the face of Africa, right? In the outset, in the 17th century, initially, Africans who were also forced into forced labor, you know, they weren't the only ones. Europeans were indentured. They were being dominated and forced into servitude as well, sometimes by choice and a lot of times not by choice. But over time, this changed. Over time, you might have, you would see a distinction between Europeans who could only be dealt with in terms of being indentured, but Africans would be then enslaved. And so the main difference between the forced slavery, forced servitude that these two groups of these two demographics, the main difference between them in the 17th century is that as an indentured person, that was a period of time, 7 years, 10 years, a little less, and you would have your freedom. But as someone who is I would say perceived as an enslaved person, but who had this condition imposed on them, you're not a person. You lose your personhood. And this is where, you know, the notion of chattel slavery comes from. And not only are you considered property, which is basically what this means, real estate, you also have this condition imposed on you for life, right? Indentured servants, here's a period of time, you're done. You can, you know, try to get your life together and have a future. But the only future you have as so-called property is producing more property. And so here again, what we see in both in terms of historical enslavement and mass incarceration with this business of durante vita, this business of perpetual enslavement, we see the parallel with life sentences. Life sentences without parole is the same thing as durante vita. They have these things in common. And then the intergenerational piece. Because in the 17th century, children assumed the condition of the mother, but they also assumed the condition of the father. And so if you were born to parents who were enslaved, then this would be your condition in life. And with mass incarceration and that whole phenomenon, we're talking about taking parents from their families. And so often when you are already in that demographic of what we call low income or no income, and you take the parents out of the relationship with the children, then the instability there just creates all kinds of problems emotionally, economically, psychologically, and what have you. And oftentimes you see the children repeating, you know, the following the path of the parents. And this too is that's on purpose. It's on purpose. What I call the criminal punishment empire, which is, you know, just another iteration of the colonial empire of enslavement. It follows its roots. When you trace its roots back, they go back to colonial law, where colonial officials sat in rooms or wherever and had discussions about how they were going to control their so-called labor supply. And out of these debates and these decisions and whatnot, then we have the hierarchy that enslavement shows us. Another aspect of the roots of this is Western patriarchy. When you look at the hierarchy of a slave plantation and you look at the hierarchy of a penal institution, it's the same. At the top are white men. At the top are people with money. Where do they get their money from? The people at the so-called bottom. And in each case, whether we're talking about historical enslavement or we're talking about mass incarceration today, those people are the same people. And the whole business of patriarchy, that's a whole nother other thing. And we don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to. That's so I don't go over time. And I think I did anyway. So, but also what we find at the nexus between historical enslavement and mass incarceration is the 13th Amendment. In that 13th Amendment, there was what, supposed to be the amendment that abolished slavery. But right in the middle of that sentence is what's called, the exception clause, wherein slavery continues as punishment for crime for those duly convicted. And here, this is the nexus. This is where the two meet. And this continues to be, what reflects our Constitution today in terms of how this thing continues. Post-Civil War, when those who represent the so-called power structure, and that would be white elitist men, trying to make sure that they have continued access to black bodies, we have the imposition of black codes, which is just a variation of so-called slave codes. Out of this time period, we get convict leasing. Why convict leasing? Because those duly convicted can be submitted to slavery. And so we get all kinds of laws that were designed to basically criminalize newly emancipated black people. And then there are these other variations or iterations of criminalizing and subjugating black people. Angola represents a specific example of what happened post-emancipation. The same land that Angola Penitentiary is on was a slave plantation. The labor that operates that plantation continues to be black people, mainly. During enslavement, of course, 100% black. Now it's 75% black. Still mostly wholly black. And the idea of usurping the life force of people then and now continues. It's the same. Angola, if you are incarcerated in Angola, 97% of the people incarcerated there are going to die there. And that's what? Just a small percentage. I just want to read a little from my brother. And he talks about how, in terms of the similarities, those who worked that plantation during days of enslavement, they're in the field, they're picking cotton or cultivating sugarcane, or they are dealing with livestock, whatever the work was. This is the same work that's being done in Angola today. And when you first get there, he tells me, it's like, you're going to be in the fields. And some people never get other kinds of jobs other than those in the field. And when you first get there and you're working in the fields, you don't get paid. If you happen to stay there, live through that, you might get a few pennies per hour. That's your rate of pay. And $1 is like the highest amount that you'll get paid working any job there. And you might get paid a little more if you are leased out to corporations who get a tax break when they hire you. That's today. He writes, one day you might be picking vegetables. Next day you might be throwing hay. The next day we may be painting a building. Sometime we would have to clean out canals and ditches that have snakes in them. Now, according to the seasons, we may pick pecans. Summertime, we may cut tall grass with swing blades or use hoes to cut or chop grass from under the fence line. And another letter he writes, I'm all right, just sitting in this prison wasting time. I think a lot about what I could be doing if I was at home. All my days are being wasted, and I feel like I could be doing something with my life. I'm smart and I learn fast, but I have nothing to do here. Life here is a drag. I wonder a lot, why am I here? I never raped nobody, but I'm still here. What is my purpose of living? I'm not helping anyone or doing anyone any good. I feel like my life should have meaning. It's bad when 12 people decide if you live or die. The thing is, these 12 people, they don't know the law. All they do is listen to the DA and go home, eat, and sleep, not knowing what they just done to a person that day. Anyway, I know everybody has their own cross to bear. But I wouldn't mind so much if I deserved this. I feel like I could have been anything I wanted to be if I had my mind in the right places. I would like to be free one more time before I die. I'm closer to death than life right now. I'm almost 60 years old. I would like to see the house again, or maybe our childhood church, or even just the hood one more time. Do you think God still has a plan for my life? Maybe he do. But I don't like this part of his plan. One of the things, what do we do about this? It's an enormous kind of problem. But I think for many of us, we don't get the enormity of it, and we have to. We're talking about over 2 million people. We're talking about people being locked up even when they haven't been convicted of anything because they can't post bail. And we have to understand that it's not normal to have your physical body taken and dominated by a system that is basically there to make money off of you. One of the things we can do in terms of that 13th Amendment, because that is the nexus, it's not the only thing, is to support that legislation when it comes up. The U.S. Congress, they've debated that. It didn't pass both houses, the House and the Senate. And other states have addressed this issue and have passed legislation to take that criminal exception loophole out of the Constitution. Louisiana had it on the ballot a couple of years back. It didn't pass. It was a confusing wording of the amendment, and so they have to hopefully visit that again. And I think the beginning of what we do is to understand that we do have personal sovereignty. It's like we don't know that we're supposed to be free. We're not treated like it. And when the government, through its police force, whether federal or state government, they will come and take people from you and keep them forever. It's like we don't get that that's not okay. It's not acceptable. And so we need to understand the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment talks about the various powers and the balance of powers and how the federal government needs to be checked, and because it shouldn't have overreach in terms of state government, and state government will fight back when they feel federal government overreach. But when the state government undermines the sovereignty of the people, we sort of are confused by that. But the people is one of the sovereign powers that is spoken about in that amendment. The federal government, state government, and we the people. And we the people, I think we're blindsided so often, we don't understand that that's overreach. And that overreach needs to be checked. And so we need to look at those organizations, institutions in our communities, in our state and nationally, who have been there all along to help us to push back against state overreach. And these are just a few of them. And I just recently learned about this one organization, the Institute to End Mass Incarceration. They have a 10-year plan. And from the way I read it, it's workable. So we want to learn where our protection is, how we the people can have some kind of redress against the overreach of state government, and learn what those organizations and institutions are, and support them in whatever way that we can. And yes, the Charles Blockson collection is there too, because that's what they do here. They inform and empower the community. We have to use our imagination. We have to imagine the possibility of being free. We cannot continue to say that's the way it is. If that's the way it is, that's the way it'll always be. But we have the capacity to envision the kind of America that we want. And I just have that quote there from Hurston, who talks about living in a town with no jailhouse. There was a period of time there's no jailhouse. So can we not imagine an America where we don't have 2.2 million people in prison? And, with my imagination, I'm saying the whole thing needs to, be abolished. Brian Stevenson is known for, he makes the point that slavery didn't end with the 13th Amendment. It changed forms. And I like to also think that freedom, the revolution, the American Revolution, that the part of it that makes any sense at all, the idea that liberty and justice for all is what we ought to have and what it was worth fighting for, that revolution didn't end with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. That revolution continues, and that revolution has to continue until those ideals are living in us. we have to embody them. To the extent that we don't, we continue to have a house divided, right? And these are just some dates and some dates that deal with this whole business of incarceration that I think is helping us to have a certain consciousness about incarceration. This year marks 51 years of mass incarceration, which those who create that date, they're looking at the early 1970s as the point when mass incarceration began to increase. March is next month, National Criminal Justice Month. It's about understanding the criminal justice system. I say it ought to become about dismantling the criminal justice system because there's no justice there. And April is Second Chance Month, and here in Pennsylvania, there will be a fair that has resources in relation to that. I don't know where Norristown is. You all know that place?
Yeah, not far from here at all.
Okay, well, you can go there and get some information.